Hello and welcome to Student Affairs Live. I'm your host, Tony Doody, and I'm pleased to be joining you from my professional home at Rutgers University. We broadcast on the Higher Ed Live network, and you can tune in to Student Affairs Live along with my brilliant friend and co-host, Heather Shea, Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. In a moment, I'll introduce you to our guests, but we can't do that without first giving a shout out to the sponsors that make Student Affairs Live possible. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. An accessible site is a highly usable site for everyone. It's time to make it a priority. M. Stoner's Accessibility Checkup provides actionable information to help your website comply with legal requirements and improve site performance for 7 major user characteristics. Interested in learning more? Or tweeting out a link now. This broadcast is also sponsored by ACPA, College Student Educators International. Support for Student Affairs Live is one of the many ways ACPA provides innovative professional development. Visit myacpa.org to discover additional personal and professional development opportunities. I want to take a moment now to thank Mallory Bauer and Kate Zulo, who are helping to monitor the back channel and forwarding to me your best content and questions from the Twitterverse. Also want to give a shout out to Marilyn Mackis and Mimi Collins from the National Association of College Employers for helping me assemble this really rock star group of panelists here today. Very fortunate and happy to have you all here. And finally, I am very honored to have everyone join us. Lisa Hinkley, Daniel Black, Manny Contomanolis, Gary Allen Miller, and Trudy Steinfeld. Sorry, did I just trounce on your name? You can fix it for me, please.
That's close enough.
Right. Took me till about the 3rd grade, Tony, so don't worry about it.
Well, think about my last name, how much teasing I got. Yeah. All right, so we're going to have everyone introduce themselves. We're going to have a good time here today, hopefully learn a lot together. I can see we have a really big crowd here listening in on the live broadcast, so I'm excited. If you're tuning in right now, please share with your friends on social media so they can join the conversation. We're going to start from left to right on my screen and have you introduce ourselves. We'll start with Dan. Could you tell us your current role and share with us the one piece of career advice you wish you had followed when you were younger?
Yeah. So hi, everyone. I'm Dan Black. Thank you for the intro, Tony. I am currently the global recruiting leader for EY, formerly known as Ernst & Young, so responsible for all hires around the world at all levels. Been doing that job for all of 19 days. Led recruiting in the Americas for EY prior to that. The one piece of advice I wish I would have gotten was not to be so narrow in my search. If you would have told me when I was a young man that I'd be leading a recruiting function across 6 continents, I probably would have laughed in your face. So having an open mind to new and different opportunities and not being so laser focused would probably be my best piece.
Excellent. All right, on to you, Gary.
Right, I'm Gary Miller. I'm currently Director of University Career Services here at UNC Chapel Hill. In terms of the advice I would have wanted to receive when I was younger, I was a first-generation college student. And I think I was sort of stereotypically not knowing what I didn't know, right? And so I think the advice that I would give to myself is that there's a whole host of people who want to be in your corner, and understanding how to tap into those folks, not just career services people, but recognizing you've got lots and lots of folks that want you to be successful. That by itself is a hard concept for folks to grasp. So I think that would be my piece of advice. Don't overlook those folks.
Excellent. All right, Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Hinkley. I'm the Associate Vice President for Career and Professional Development at Lake Forest College. I'm a member of the President's Senior Staff Team and really lead our institutional efforts to integrate career preparation across the curriculum. The piece of advice that I wish I would have taken when I was a student was to take more business classes. All of those, politics classes and then graduate school and student affairs administration were all lovely, but higher education is a business, and I've had to teach myself a lot.
Excellent. All right, Manny, and I apologize for messing up your name. Can you pronounce it for us, please?
No worries, Tony. My name is Manny Contomanolis, and I lead career services and cooperative education at the Rochester Institute of Technology in my role as Senior Associate Vice President. The one piece which I had followed was to, when they used to say years ago, "Go West, young man."
Yeah.
The one piece of advice I always got was go abroad, young man. Leave the U.S. Open up your eyes. And I wish I had done that because now we realize how really truly global the world is and how global talent is, and that is something I really wish I would have done much earlier in my career.
Fantastic. All right, Trudy, you're up.
Hi, so I'm Trudy Steinfeld, and most recently, actually about the same amount of days as Dan, I've transitioned to being an early careers talent and workplace consultant. And but I'm still transitioning out of my role at a great institution, NYU, where I was the Associate Vice President leading global career development across all of our sites, as well as our main campus in New York. And I guess the one piece of advice I wish that I had followed is that my Aunt Ruthie told me to go to law school and not to let anything stop me. And I think I'm a little older than some of you on the screen, and I think that in those days, women really thought about career choice in a different way, and law school just seemed something that was such a reach for, like Gary, a first-generation college student. But so I think the bottom line is you should follow your dreams, whatever it is, and don't let anyone tell you no.
There you go. I think we should write a book on my story and yourself. All right, so the title of this episode is Trends in Career Development. So let's start off with that question. So we'll go back to you, Dan. What is the one career development trend that you're paying close attention to this year? And I recognize that your answer may be a little different than career development given your role.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a which one of these is not like the others, right? But I do, having been a past president of NACE and working so closely with people on the phone and career services across the U.S. and abroad, I think a big trend I'm seeing of late, certainly the last 6 months, but even 12 to 18, is alternatives with respect to job search. To a lesser extent, job readiness. There's other ways that, and I'll tell you at EY, that candidates and students are finding employers, finding employment, whether that's technology, there's artificial intelligence, networking, and social. It seems like there's a new batch of those kind of popping up every single day. As an employer, it certainly has been useful for us to be able to tap into some of those resources and reach some students we might not otherwise come across on some of our college campuses. And a good 10% of our hires at the firm in the Americas are people that we've never physically met on a campus. We've met them through other means. That said, I will say that there's definitely been a difference. There's something to be said for all of the suite of offerings that a student can avail themselves of within a career services environment or a career development environment with a focus on development, whether it's a career readiness, interview readiness, information about employers, making connections that might otherwise be difficult. If you've ever tried to make a connection with someone online cold, you know what I'm talking about. So I think, while there's lots of different ways to start a job search and to think about careers as a student, if you do have a career services, career development opportunity or an established group on your campus, that is still, to me, that's a home run. It's a free resource in essence to get yourself in front of what is, generally speaking, a very wide swath of employment opportunities.
Great. All right. Gary, the trend you're paying tuning into this year.
Yeah, I think if we look at our connections and our relationships with the academic affairs side of our institutions, I think this is an important one. And it's coming up in a lot of ways. I mean, I think the NACE benchmarking data still shows that most of our offices are connected to student affairs, but we have seen changes there. And a lot of those changes, I think, have been related to the elevation of career services that we've seen over the past half dozen years or so. And in many cases, you have individuals who, if not reporting directly to a provost or a president, are getting elevated to sort of the same level within the organization. So that connectivity, I think, is a really important trend, not just structurally how it impacts us, but also how we think about how we're connecting with students. I think for too long, it's been the case that career services has been sort of an optional route for students. And students come into higher education knowing they have academic commitments that they have to follow through with. They know there's a curriculum that they need to follow. And I think increasingly what we want to see is how can we make a parallel set of expectations for our students as it relates to their career development, so that connectivity with academic affairs becomes essential, not only for the major connections to our, skill development and pathwaying into different industries, but also just our place in their experience in the environment.
Fantastic. All right, Lisa, you're up.
So I'm really paying attention to what's happening in the labor market right now. I mean, there are projections that 40% of jobs that exist today aren't going to exist maybe 15 years from now. And, we've got students here, traditional undergraduate students that are going to be here for 4 years. It doesn't take that many cycles before we're to 15 years. And I think that that has its own implications for the Career Center, how we organize the Career Center, how we keep track of those trends. So we've made some shifts here in really organizing around more of an industry-centric approach. So we've got 5 career pathways, and that lets me put people in areas of expertise that they can also be tracking these technology trends by field more closely.
That brings up an interesting point, and hopefully we'll get to it later on in the episode. So someone please revisit it if it doesn't come up, and that's, are we communicating back to the faculty what employers are looking for? All right, Manny, you're up.
Yeah, so I'm really, really fascinated with the future of assessment and the role that's going to increasingly play in the work that we do. Not that this is a new concept. We've been assessing and evaluating things for a while, but the first destination standards that NACE established for the first time kind of set this bigger structure of gathering, analyzing, and articulating data relative to first destination outcomes. But that was really just the tip of this wave that's kind of sweeping over higher education in general, but certainly in the career services world. And that is informed decision making. In other words, how are we evaluating our efforts? How are we making decisions that are based on data and our analysis of that data? And today we have tools that were not readily available to us in the past. We have more practitioners who are more comfortable and interested in utilizing statistical tools and data visualization tools in a way that I think opens up some amazing doors for us. But my interest is not only just on the career services side, but it's also an interest in how employers are assessing candidates. So I'm thinking about assessment very, very broadly. I see the future as, about skills, not schools, about competencies, not curricula. So I think that as the employer community begins to get more and more sophisticated in how they're assessing candidates, what skills and competencies that they're looking for, I think that's going to translate into the work that we're doing. And you see that a little bit now, even at some colleges and universities that are much more competency focused. In other words, they're looking at not just a particular sequence of courses, but trying to better understand what are these competencies that are needed. And NACE is playing a role in helping with that, clearly. But also, how can we develop these competencies? How can we map them to things that we're doing? But also, how can we focus on them to better help employers make those matches for long-term success?
Excellent. All right, Trudy, you're up.
Hi, I've really been interested in paying close attention to the impact of the number of international students that are studying, certainly on campuses in the US, many of them at the graduate level. And I think until recently, so many of them were coming for a great education, but very much motivated by getting a great career and an internship or some other experiential education opportunity while they were here. Those opportunities are more challenging. So first is that I think career centers across the country, and this is in large, medium, small institutions, public and private, have really gotten slammed by the number of international students who are now very much seeking out services. And if you look at any of the national data on international students, it really takes more time to work with them to introduce the American style job search. And obviously there's many other hoops and obstacles that they're going to need to jump through, whether they can win that visa lottery, whether the kind of academic training they have allows them to have an internship while they're here studying. And I think it's really challenged career offices to really think differently in how they're going to support those students. Now, I also think that employers are also equally challenged. They see great student talent. They might be from fill in the blank country, and they really want to make those hires, but whether the business that they're in or whether the difficulty in obtaining visas for these students make it very, very challenging. And I also think that there is, a lot of concentration on college campuses to really how do we best support those students. And I think for some reason, in addition to the international or foreign student offices, the career office seems to be front and center in that type of discussion. And I think that there's going to continue to be, especially with the economic and political conditions that we now find ourselves in, really big challenges to serving those students well.
Cool. So we've gotten our first question on Twitter from Mika Karakari. She's a Cincinnati native, an essay doc at Miami of Ohio, and she asks, given the current trends in career services departments, are career services departments becoming more industry focused? If not, why not? And how can this shift benefit students? So anyone can jump in on that one.
Well, I think that, yeah, go ahead. Maybe Lisa, why don't you kick this off, because you're doing some interesting things.
Yeah, so I mean, it's certainly with the specialization that's happening across the labor market, I think we're seeing it in career centers. We have to get more specialized at our work. It's not sufficient to just say, oh, I help students with their early career development. Someone else in the office helps with internships. Someone else helps with job search or graduate school. There has to be a continuum across that whole experience. And Gary mentioned earlier that they're looking more at their institution even at how how do they make those connections with the academic side. The way that we've chosen to do it at Lake Forest, I'd mentioned the career pathways, is in a way creating a new system that sits a little bit more almost on top of the academic experience or alongside of the academic experience. So the 5 career pathways that we have are business and finance, creative arts, science and healthcare, law and public service, and the build your own. So there's home for absolutely everyone in those pathways, but those pathways are also not your traditional just sort of service delivery kinds of things. My first role in the field was a college-based position where I had a field sort of expertise in communication arts and sciences. But the big difference in what we're doing at Lake Forest and the kind of this era of industry-specific advising is looking more at how do we create communities. It's not enough for me to have a really talented team. I need to have a team who can mobilize students, faculty, staff, alumni, trustees, friends of the college, employers that we put in that bucket of the friends who don't fall in all of those other categories. I mean, there really needs to be a way that we're getting students connected to the world. They can Google anything. So if we're not really helping them to cut through the clutter and to navigate their way through these increasingly specialized fields and labor markets, I think the Career Center really has to be careful. A Career Center needs to own their expertise and dig in enough to the industry information that they can be seen as experts.
Right. Yeah, Tony, just if I could piggyback on top of that, one of the things I would say, and Manny and Trudy, I know this is being done. Even if career services, has a broad swath, the offerings through career services, whether it's more targeted career fairs or hey, here's a session on building your resume toward a business interview, right? So even if the career services tends to offer again a broad array of advice to a large number of students, I think making some specific inroads with employers to say, here's how we're targeting those people that you're likely going to want to be in front of, more so than anyone else. Very attractive to an employer for sure. I can speak from experience.
And if
Tony,
I could chime in, if I could
go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, very quickly. I just wanted two ideas that I think spring from what we just heard from Lisa and Dan. I think we do have to grapple with the reality that when you're talking to everybody, you're talking to nobody. That we live in an era of customization. We expect that in our lives now. When we log on to Amazon, it knows what we bought last, and it's thinking probably what we're going to buy next. And that's the world in which we live. But the corollary to that, or maybe the flip side of that coin, that I think we will all struggle with is how much specialization can you do at scale, at the scales that we have, and simultaneously, given the acknowledgement that the labor market does change quickly, what downsides come with aligning with industries when there's so much shifting and change among industries themselves? And that will be, I think, a challenge for us to tackle.
One point I wanted to add is that, and this touches on what Lisa said earlier about the kind of over specialization of roles in career services. And I think one of the other kind of underlying cultural changes that speak to this point, they certainly happen at NYU, certainly happen at RIT, certainly happen in a number of institutions across the country, is everybody interacts with employers. It doesn't matter what your role is, but the old days of I'm a career counselor, I only talk to students, and I'm a employee relations person and I only talk to employers, is an outdated, ineffective model. When you're counseling someone, if you don't have that gravitas, that integrity of knowing people in industry, of talking to recruiters when they're on campus, of visiting employer work sites, of really kind of generating that network that you can draw on as needed, but that gives you as an individual advisor that integrity, that ability to work with a student far more comprehensively. I think that's really a key cultural shift, and I think it's a good one. The idea of account management, the idea of being able to support employers directly based on their needs, and the idea that you could walk in an office and you know what, these people just don't sit on campus. They know what's going on out there, not just in terms of reading reports, but visiting work sites, understanding what employers have particular interest in a certain kind of institution or a certain kind of academic program. I think that's going to be increasingly a differentiator between highly effective offices and those that will struggle more.
And I'll just say lastly, very briefly, that I think that career services organization is at least ones that are really establishing themselves with thought leadership are the ones that can inform the academics, the faculty, and as well as their students, but a variety of stakeholders of what is going on in industry, what are the trends, what are the competencies, what are the skills, and that just makes them seem as more credible and gives them, again, the word gravitas was used, more gravitas and more weight on campus. And by the way, when you're a career center fighting for resources, if you can establish that you are aware of what industry is looking for in trends, and that you can help inform your institution, advance some of the things that they're trying to offer students, it puts you in a really good position.
So somewhat related to what you were just discussing, Matt Henderson from Georgia State U asked, does career services have an image problem in higher ed? Is there a best way to overcome the, quote, you do more than resumes syndrome?
Well, I guess I would just say that, one of the hardest things to do is just like to paint the entire hiring community in some broad brushstrokes. That would be impossible and ineffective to do. The same is true of career services. Frankly, the way career services is viewed, what their mission and task, how they're resourced, often is very institutionally idiosyncratic. Or at least you could look at certain sectors. So the world for community colleges, for example, for traditional liberal arts universities, the world for large Research One universities are completely different universes, often, when it comes to career services. So I don't think that there's one way to present it or one way that actually captures it, but I do believe it would be fair to say that in certain institutions and in certain sectors of higher education, boy, oh boy, institutions are investing heavily in career services. And they see that as essential to student satisfaction, to making their alumni and other stakeholders happy. And at other institutions, unfortunately, and Trudy mentioned this kind of competition for resources, boy, there are a lot of our colleagues at a lot of campuses across this country that are really, really struggling. And that lack of resources limits what they can do. It sets a cap, if you will, or a ceiling. And then they're making hard choices. So when people look for innovation and new programs, boy, those offices and those directors and staffs are really, really challenged to take that next step when they're, neck deep in just managing the day-to-day kinds of questions that students have.
If I could piggyback, first of all, Matt, shout out, Georgia State alum. Go Blue Raiders. Second, I'm reminded of, your question reminds me of that meme that was going around a few years ago that was like, what my friends think I do, what my parents think I do, what I think I do. You know, there's a lot of different narratives about what we do. And some of it, I think, every office in higher ed probably has its fear of being stereotyped, right? I think the way we push back against this is making sure that we are collecting the right data to tell the right stories. And so if you're not collecting data that shows how you positively impact the student experience, not just in first destination realm, but also with their interactions with your office, what they learned, the way you helped retain them, so on and so forth, you have to have that data to help you tell that story. And qualitative data is perfectly valid as well. But if you don't have that and you're just running around saying, but we're not the resume people, it's easy to discount that, right? But if you say, we do resumes, yes, absolutely. Helping students tell their story is a big part of what we do, but we impact them in ways X, Y, Z that are really important to their retention and their success here. That to me is the key.
So speaking of resumes, are resumes still relevant today with the introduction of LinkedIn? Do we still need to focus in on resumes?
I'd like to, yes, and and the reason is a very simple one, is that you may learn about your job. Dan introduced a number of technologies, a number of networking situations, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to submit that resume to an applicant tracking system. And, it's not that if an employer, picks out that resume because they've done a keyword search and the recruiters put in all kinds of things and the algorithm has done its thing. It's not that they're going to not Google the person, look at their LinkedIn profile, do a lot of other research on them before they invite them in for an interview. But the resume is going to really, I think, go to, the core, again, of how recruiters are selecting students. And Dan is shaking his head because I think that it's, and anyone who thinks that they don't need a resume anymore, or they think it needs to look all cute, they're going to be making a big mistake because they're not going to get found. But Dan, you look like you wanted to.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's still the common denominator, the universal. As much as there's lots of technologies and companies and social sites that want to be the single go-to place for that kind of information about a potential applicant or prospect. And the fact of the matter is, people have preferences, and they don't necessarily, this one wants to be on LinkedIn, this one wants to be on, fill in the blank on another site, social or not. And the resume is still kind of the common denominator. And by the way, this is not, endemic just to the U.S. This is kind of around the world with your resume, CV, what have you. I think I would say that there are the enhancements. If you have an opportunity to enhance your resume in some way, in other words, there's lots of different kind of ways that you can showcase your skills in addition to the resume, whether that be through the social profiles that Trudy mentioned, or there's actually other technologies that you can participate in that will help to showcase some of your work, cases you've done, projects and papers you've worked on, those kinds of things. That's great. But the resume, I think, is still for the foreseeable kind of that one thing that we got to make sure you have telling the right story about yourself.
I would just add that I think for me, whenever I think about it, I say the resume is necessary. It's just no longer sufficient.
Right.
If you want to be an effective job seeker, you need to have a resume. And as a matter of fact, you need to have several versions of your resume.
Right.
But that aside, to Dan's point, there are an increasing number of platforms like Behance and Portfolium and new enterprise systems that are really kind of emphasizing not the traditional resume, but the idea of a portfolio, the idea of being able to articulate your experiences, give evidence of those, link that portfolio to examples of the work that you're doing. I think you're going to see more and more of that. But boy, I don't think any time in the near term are those things going to take the place of at least what we come to understand in broad terms as a resume.
I think all of us are focused on helping students tell their story, their best story, in whatever medium makes sense. But to Dan's point earlier, I do think we're talking about, the resume is the key that opens the door, and maybe all these social profiles and portfolios and stuff are the furniture once you get in the room. You could still be on the outside banging the door, but if you don't have that key, you may never get in to show off your other stuff. And also, Georgia State is the Panthers, not the Blue Raiders. They're totally going to take away my alumni card. I conflated my alumni mascot with my graduate degree.
So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I know we've got professionals that are trying to help students navigate social spaces, and they're also potentially looking for jobs. So regarding LinkedIn, what is it that makes someone stand out? Are things like endorsements and number of connections and engagement on feeds, are those important aspects of a LinkedIn profile?
I just want to say one thing very quickly about this, because I think there's a number of things, and first of all, there's some just common sense things that especially early talent doesn't do, which you need a headshot. You can't have the shadow. Two, which many people have. That so
good,
looks
Dan.
like your former profile, Dan. The other thing that I would just say, and then I know everybody else has something to contribute to this, is that right under your name, what you want to do. It's not only if you're a student looking for a job off of campus, your first full-time gig, you don't want to have graduating student, seeking this. You really want to have the field and competencies showing up in that top line under your name on your profile, and some of those important skills, and some of them a little aspirational, because that's how employers are going to find you and other professionals.
Cool. All right. So related to, Gary started to bring this up, and when I went to school, I remember seeing jobs posted, kind of tacked up on a bulletin board in the residence halls or on bus stops. And now it has evolved, right? Now we're using technology to connect employers to our students. In fact, Sarah Dell from Wentworth asked, what are the innovative ways that employers and schools are supporting and interacting with students on campus? Gary, you want to field that?
No.
No?
I think the truth of the matter is there isn't one answer, right? Because it's multi-channel, it's multi-technology, it's in person, it's digital, it's on campus, it's off campus. And so I think the challenge that we as career services professionals and our colleagues on the college recruiting side of the house deal with is it's not really about what's the best technology for me to use. It's all context, right? So where are the students that I want to connect with, or from the other side, where are the employers that I want to connect with, and what is that pathway? So obviously for career services folks, we all have our various career services management platforms, whether it's Simplicity or Handshake or CSO or whatever. And that's always going to be a powerful tool because there's a good relationship there. But we also know realistically those connections can come in a million different places, whether those digital or not. So I don't think there's a pat answer. I think it falls to people on both sides of this connective transaction to figure out what is the right channel for the context that I'm seeking today. And that's maybe just like a wordy way to dodge the question, and I'm willing to own that. But I think it's true.
All right. So Manny, I'm going to direct this next one to you. A lot of schools are in the midst of new student orientation right now. And I think folks are often unsure as when we should actually introduce career development into the student experience. So on a continuum from new student orientation to graduation and beyond into alumni status, when and how frequently should career services be introduced and utilized by students?
The simple answer is early and often.
Okay.
But I do think that, the strategies most universities are employing is, recognizing that there's like a time action triad, right? In other words, people will take action when they're ready to take action, when it makes sense for them given where they are at a particular point in time in their life. So the idea, I think, the underlying principle, perhaps is a better way to put it, is to introduce students early. Make sure that they understand there are services to help them. Make sure that they understand thinking about a career or thinking about what they want to do, what they want to pursue in their life is an ongoing process. And that thinking about it is okay. It doesn't just occur in a vacuum. Dialoguing with people about it is okay. And I think what most institutions are trying to do in some way, shape, or form is build a kind of culture, an institutional culture around careers, where it's not just the responsibility of career services or, quite honestly, faculty, but academic advisors, other student services professionals, alumni who are engaged, employer partners, even trustees. So this idea of kind of mapping that out, which in many ways is not like one single roadmap that says this is what you do first year, this is what you do second year, third and fourth, but rather a lot of that has to do with ability so students can experiment, explore, look at different things through experiential learning or internship programs. But most importantly, to recognize that when a student says, I want to go into software engineering, as an example, or a student who says, I want to go into accounting or nursing, or a student who says, I think I want to start my own business, those pathways can be significantly different. How you prepare for them, how you think about them, when you take action. So I think one of the big trends is helping students early on to understand there are services available. That's really critical. To start to build this culture of ask questions, explore, think about this. Think about your courses and what they mean. Think about your experiences and what they mean. And I think that kind of culture change really allows the student to kind of embark on that early and go through that whole college career surrounded by people who are thinking about and sensitive to that and encouraging and sometimes nudging them, sometimes pushing them to think about things and take action.
I think there's an idea that people believe thinking about your career has to be hard work, but there are a number of career centers around the country, and at Lake Forest we're one of them, that we start at orientation with helping students understand how to play around career. So we do an activity with our Center for Chicago Programs in which we pull students together. We get them to start thinking about what are you bringing with you, the experiences, the interests, what are you really excited about? And what are some of the ways those might play out here? And we get them networking with each other really at orientation. We have 2 hours as part of orientation where we've got them getting together in groups, talking about their values, and then building structures out of, this is part of the silly fun part, boxes and tape and markers and all kinds of things where they're actually starting to express themselves to their peers who we know long-term are going to become some of their most important members of their network after graduation. But we start in a playful way. And I don't care if they remember anything else from that time that we have with them other than, hey, career stuff doesn't have to be hard and scary. And the Career Center staff are actually kind of cool. Like I could spend some time with them. I could stop by and see them. I know there are others that do Lego competitions and all kinds of things as part of those first few weeks, but we've found a lot of success in that with our students to build that culture early.
I know Mallory Bowers on the back channel. I hope you're quoting that career services professionals can be cool.
Tweeting it out.
So Dan, this next question is to you. So relative to what folks have just discussed, how should students best represent their co-curricular? I know their experiences. I know a lot of folks do a student involvement transcript or something similar. How can they do that in a way that employers can understand and translate that into skills and competencies that make sense for employers?
Yeah, I think there's for us, and we talk about it, like there's a three-pronged approach. Number one is on the resume itself. All too often, there's some standard resume format that someone's given that says, thou shalt put this first and that second and this third. And maybe your most important contribution to, in your academic career was to a student club that you were the president of for 5 years, but that's buried at the bottom of your paper. So bring that up, call out accomplishments, not just, either memberships or positions held. And that sparked a lot of good conversations. So that's part one. Off the resume is what we talked about earlier, some additional technology, whether it's, to your point, a co-curricular transcript, a lot of technology out there. There are different universities that I've been to where they have either a student slip sheet or some other data sheet that the employer might provide that gives you the opportunity to expound on things that are beyond the academic. Take advantage of them. I've seen some of these things that look, pitifully and woefully undercompleted, and you really miss an opportunity to sell your best self if that's a big part of who you are. And the last thing is through, kind of live interaction with the employer. I can't overstate how important it is to participate in, whether it's the meet and greets. We do a lot of teamwork and team building events now. We have leadership programs. There's a whole host of things at which you can really showcase some of those skills, because you're right, is your GPA. It's a number. But if you can come and interact with an employer and via that, kind of mechanism, show them how great you are interacting with people of diverse backgrounds, or how resilient you are, there's almost no better way to showcase it than to have someone see it and experience it live. And I think, a lot of students still do this. It's like, let me drop my resume in the proverbial slots, 15 or 20 of them. Let's see what hits I get. I think it's much more important to get out and pound the pavement to the extent that you have the opportunity to do so, because then you can really showcase some of those skills that you've learned outside of pure academics, to the employer directly.
So perhaps this is industry specific, but you can probably answer this because you're not in higher ed anymore. How important is the GPA?
Well, it depends on the employer, and you're right, it is industry specific. I will tell you that there still is a decent school of thought that says if you are a full-time student, that is your full-time job, your GPA is some indicator of how well you're performing at your full-time job. Now, there's a whole host of caveats, grade curving and whether it was in your major or not. There's a whole host of things that you can do and say. At the end of the day, what I tell students is, if I am deciding between two candidates and I only have one slot, and they are absolutely identical in every single way, personality, competency, etc., and one has a 4.0 and one has a 2.0, I'm going for the 4. So, it's not the end all be all, but it certainly is something that most employers I interact with at least consider as part of the assessment process.
Tony, can I build quickly off something that Dan said earlier at the beginning of the initial question about that representation piece? I think we as universities do a really good job of encouraging students to do. What we don't do a good job of is encouraging students to make meaning. And we give them spaces to do a lot, and we don't give them spaces to make meaning a lot. So it's harder for them sometimes to effectively convey that to the employer, because they haven't given themselves the space to say, yeah, I did all these things, but what did they mean to me? And that's really the key, I think, to then turning around and sharing it with someone like Dan.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to tell the viewers, thank you. There were so many good questions out there. Some of them, many probably better than mine. I think we're gonna have to do a second round of this, because there's no way we're gonna get all these questions in over the course of the next 15 minutes. So I really appreciate all the engagement in this episode and also on the back channel here today. Trudy, regarding articulating skills, say a student has an experience in a student organization or in a fraternity or sorority or in a programming board or even an on-campus position working in a student union, for instance. How can non-career services professionals assist in this challenge of helping them articulate their skills?
One of the things that I think all of us would probably agree about is that career services is everyone's business on campus. It really needs to become, and that's a sea change, and not every institution has embraced it, but I think everyone who is concerned with outcomes for students and making sure that students make that bridge to their first job out of school really needs to be concerned. And certainly in the student affairs landscape, as well as other parts of higher education, people are very concerned with learning outcomes. But having students talk about, Gary mentioned storytelling, about their hard and soft skills and competencies in a way that gives meaning and can convey to an employer is everyone's business. And I actually think campus jobs, and I oversaw one of the largest student employment programs, and one of the things we really tried to do is make everyone on campus understand that the ideal is let that student get hired. You mentor them, you work with them, you give them opportunities to build and grow and enhance their skills, and then be able to take those and leave the institution actually probably very early into an internship or other kind of career-related part-time opportunity that will advance what they're trying to do after college. And I think sometimes that not everyone in higher ed really has embraced that, but that is where I think things need to be going, and I think innovative institutions are doing it. And I just want to also say that a lot of the skills, somebody on this panel used the term, we hired GSPs. Who was that? He didn't have hair on his head, so it's one of three.
That doesn't narrow it down.
One of three. And it was Dan, years ago, who said we hire, at the end of the day, we hire good, smart people. So how does good, smart people, or how does that translate in employer speak? And if you look at some of the skills, predictive actually now, that employers are really seeking, it's things, grit and resiliency, curiosity, problem solving, teamwork, ownership or accountability of doing that. And students every single day have experiences, whether it was in a class, an internship, something they navigated at home, a roommate problem, if they were to study abroad, doing something in another language, really in investigating or joining an organization that really looks interesting to them. And good career coaching, I just do want to bring it back to the career office, can help students tease that out of them and get them to be able to not be modest or shy about introducing that to an employer. Because when any employer is interviewing a student, whether it's on campus or off, for a position, they are really looking for those examples that demonstrate some of those really important competencies. And students need to be coached by the career services, their faculty, club advisors, supervisors on campus jobs, to really how to articulate that effectively by example that demonstrates those core skills.
So Manny, this next question for you, can you provide a few examples of the partnerships beyond obvious academic departments that might be important for career development departments to be successful? Yeah, certainly half of the folks watching today are probably dedicated career services professionals, but the other half is probably a wide range of student affairs or higher education professionals.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's no question career services cannot be successful in a vacuum. You have to have partnerships. They're the ones that most obviously come to mind for people, and that is, with hiring organizations. Those are among your key partners. But typically when people are trying to establish these things, it's often sometimes more challenging internally than it is externally. There are trustees, there are alumni, there are corporate folks who are willing and able and want to help and engage. But internally, the partnerships are increasingly key. You mentioned faculty. We'll skip over those for a minute to focus on some of the areas that I think are increasingly important. And they run the gamut. I think first and foremost, there is the kind of development and alumni relations fundraising arm. The fact that fundraising often touches on key alumni or corporations or organizations. Now, corporate giving, for example, is tied into some other nature of the relationship with the institution. So knowing the alumni that development might be targeting for fundraising purposes, seeing what those alumni, what their experiences were, understanding those, seeing how to leverage those alumni into other kinds of partnerships that support students is clearly, one of the big areas. An area now, consistent with what I said earlier about assessment, is institutional research. More and more now, career services offices are working with institutional research to come up with assessment strategies, to work together on, first destination outcomes information, as well as tracking alumni and so forth. I think a third area, which is getting a lot of attention right now, are research relations. Faculty who have contacts, either through research arrangements, consulting assignments with corporations, with other entities that potentially could become bigger, broader partners with the university. So I think the whole idea increasingly now is thinking university-wide. What can universities do for the outside world? Talent, continuing education and training, research, fundraising, and other kinds of partnership development. How can we look at those external partnerships in a broader, comprehensive way? That's what many employers are looking for. That's what most universities are. And that demands that we're able to work with those other key providers, wherever they may be in the university setting.
So one of my near to last questions before we wrap up here today, and as I said, we've got so many good questions both in the Twitterverse and still to get to today. I think we're going to have to schedule a second round here. What advice might you have for someone who's in a broader student affairs field who might be interested in jumping into career services? How does one prepare for a career in career development? What kind of experience are most valuable beyond generic higher ed classes?
Well, I mean, I think this is to some extent. I'm sorry, someone else is supposed to go. This wasn't an anyone question, was it?
That's fine.
Okay. To some extent, it's the kind of things that we tell students: volunteer in the places that you want to be. If you're in another area of student affairs and you want to get involved with career services, whether it's your own institution or other institutions in the area, contact people in career services and say, I'm really excited about what you do. Can you tell me more? And are there ways that I can help? And then really listen to the ways that you can help. Don't just take your pet project and try to move it forward because you think it's awesome. Like, you really, if you're looking to make a transition into career services, I think it helps to start building those real relationships. And for anyone who's already in higher education, it's a lot easier to make friends in an office that's just around campus than it is to try to break in from the outside, though, I mean, similar advice holds true. Network, volunteer, gain real experiences.
I would just also, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Trudy.
So one of the things I just want to say is that, I really always hired by competency and enthusiasm, and if they were a good fit for my operation and what degree they had. I had people who had business degrees, accounting degrees, public affairs, communications. Even I was fortunate enough to have a couple of folks who had been lawyers and didn't want to be attorneys anymore, and they brought some really interesting things. But what they all shared was a passion for this work. And I think Lisa's right. If you're have a different degree or you're in a different office and you have an opportunity to gain some experience and really demonstrate that you have the enthusiasm, drive, and passion for this field, I think you will get people's attention. And we're going through quite a transition. Some of the earlier comments about some of the competencies that we need to have in terms of marketers and communicators, and really speaking to all of our stakeholders, and also the analytics and data center field that we now are. I think that's why there's room for a variety of different disciplines, but you have to be really able to talk the talk and convince career services leaders that you're really serious about this, because in the old days, I'll just say people came from very traditional higher ed, student affairs, or maybe counseling psych backgrounds. And I think there's room for a lot of different folks in this field right now.
In fact, I think that's what's most exciting about career services today, is that there's a higher percentage of non-traditionally prepared people than ever before. And I think that's what really allows the paradigm shift, if you will, that we're going through. That's what expedites it. That's what allows us to think with like new vantage points, new optics, new concepts. And I think that's what makes our work so exciting. This is people that will now become recruiters and make the shift that way. There are recruiters that work in career services. There's people from all sorts of different backgrounds, people from alumni relations who get, interested in career services, people from fundraising, people from admissions, res life, but also people from outside higher ed. And I think that's critical to our success long term. In fact, these new ideas, new people, new ways of looking at things, that's critical. That's going to be part of our lifeblood going forward.
All right, in the few minutes we have remaining left today, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Can each of you take a minute or less to share a few resources, websites, books, conferences, newsletters, associations, so that the audience can continue to learn about and explore some of the topics that we discussed here today? We'll go reverse order. Trudy, you can start us off.
So I'll just give one plug-in for Career Services Institute East. It's a conference going on and the first Monday and Tuesday in August. It's going to be sponsored by George Mason University, or held on that campus. It's a nonprofit by lots of great career services professionals and lots of great heads of employer services, including Dan, who's sitting there, and some other great folks. And then I would also just say that ERE sends out some really interesting things in the recruiting space. And I think for those of you that are in career development, knowing what's going on in the career in the recruiting space is a really important daily part of the things that I read.
Great. All right, Manny.
I'm a huge fan of the Chronicle of Higher Education. I think that so much we kind of take for granted that we're so focused on career services that we sometimes don't understand how our bigger industry works. And I think that's absolutely vital. I would certainly reinforce Trudy's point. I have everybody on my team, I encourage them to think like a recruiter, to follow recruiting trends. Another resource I follow closely is both out of Northeastern University and Georgetown University, the centers there on employment trends work. I'm an avid follower of those kinds of trends. So I really encourage people in career services to think like a recruiter. That's one bucket. To really understand the industry of higher education that we're in, and to really follow future trends.
Fantastic. All right, Lisa.
Well, we've talked about NACE, and I would expect that there are some people who aren't members of NACE yet, but may start exploring. And I would definitely encourage them to really think about membership, because there are a lot of resources that you only get access to as a member. So dig in there. There's a huge array of information along the lines of what Trudy and Manny have already been talking about. With my role with the Collegiate Employment Research Institute, I love watching what Phil Gardner is doing there, and the kinds of work, especially with what's happening in the liberal arts, what employers are looking for, how students should be presenting themselves, the T-Summit work that happens each year, describing really that students need breadth and depth. It's not an or, and I think too much of the time it seems like students need one or the other of those things. And one last item for anyone who's thinking about a career transition, I do have an opening in my office. So a resource is the Lake Forest College website, where you can find a fabulous new opportunity to play in this area.
Shameless plug.
Shameless.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All right, Gary.
Speaking of shameless plugs, Gary's up. I have two openings. very quickly, I want to mention 3 things, and only one of the 3 is further self-serving. So Kevin Grubb and I do the Career Services Slack chat that we post out on LinkedIn. I would love to see people engage in dialogues around that. I think there's some really good content being created on the Career Leadership Collective site. I think that's worth checking out. But to Manny's point about broader connection with our field, I think the AAC&U does some really great stuff, and the whole LEAP initiative, I think we need to be more closely tied to some of that work. So those would be my 3.
Oh, and just a side note, we had Tia McNair from AAC&U last month talking about high impact practices, and she was a great guest. Yep. All right, Dan, you want to bring it home?
Yeah, way to be last. Everyone said everything, but I would say we talked about NACE. I would say the regional ACEs as well. I like Career Crossroads. It tends to have a little bit more content around some experience hiring also, but a lot of good technology content that they put out, which recruitment technology, which I really, really like. And then a little off the beaten path. I don't know if you've heard of Owler.com, OWLER. It's a great way to follow specific companies, and that you get a daily in-mail or a mail in your inbox that gives you a description of what your competition is doing around a particular topic or in general. Really, it's something I read every single morning religiously. So OWLER, and you can set your own parameters around that.
Fantastic. Well, I want to give a big thanks to everyone for joining us today. This had a tremendous response both on Twitter and viewership, live viewership for today's episode. Certainly is an indication of the interest in this area. So when I invite you back, I know that the president and president-elect of NACE are busy at a board meeting and were unable to join us here today, but they certainly indicated that they'd love to join us in the future. So perhaps be an even larger panel next time we get together. Heather Shea will be back next week, actually, talking about how to use CAS standards to improve student affairs practice, and she's got a killer panel lined up as well for next week. I'll be back in August talking about the alignment of what faculty are teaching in student affairs programs and what the students are actually learning. Should be an interesting show. And you can receive reminders about this and other great shows by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. You can also browse the archives at higheredlive.com or subscribe to our iTunes podcast. I'm Tony Doody. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you make it a great week, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.